about the reality of a counteroffer. Counter offers are really kind of interesting, right? Because there you are, you're all set, you're ready to go, you've given your 2 weeks notice, you're starting to say goodbye to people. Even people are probably like planning on a goodbye party or something, and the company you're working for makes a counteroffer, and they kind of want you to stay. And that's like really kind of interesting because it kind of puts you in a little bit of a position of power here, right? Now, what's interesting, because I always see this one, especially if the counter offers for more pay, especially if it's a crazy bump like 30% or more, you probably asked for that pay raise a while back that they just didn't have the magic budget for. And now all of a sudden they have the budget for you to get this big bump in pay. Um, that's to me is a big question mark. If I'm that valuable now, why wasn't I valuable that month ago or 3 months ago or a year ago, right? You might get a chance to transfer to a new group, move away from that bad boss, move away from someone else that you want, maybe learn a bunch of new stuff, get some cool new skills, meet some cool new people. You might get everything that you wanted from the immediacy of why you're leaving. But there's one really big drawback to all this. The reason why you quit won't change. All right, you may think that you're going to be able to move to a different division, get away from that bad boss. The problem is that bad boss is probably cultural, and that bad boss has already probably talked to your new boss, right? So there's a big issue there on things that won't change because you have that shadow organization and people talking to each other inside the company and trying to figure out all the things that are going on. So this is where the counteroffer gets to be interesting. So it kind of puts you in this little position of power, right? You kind of have an opportunity to kind of go, well, hey, you're willing to give me all this, and that's great. You can decide to take it. But again, the physical, emotional, the outlooks, all those things that were driving you to leave in the first place are still going to be there. They're not going to change. That's all baked into the culture. It's baked into the company. And what makes this even more interesting, we'll talk about this here in a minute, is that counteroffer can often just be a stall tactic, right? Because there's some really sad reality around doing this. According to Prima, which is a risk insurance management group, 80% of people who take the counteroffer leave within 6 months anyways, and then 90% will leave within the year. And that's just the way the numbers work out, right? And they know this, right? And that's where the stall tactic comes in. An employer knows you're going to leave anyways, right? Now, the bad part is you already have that offer from the company you've been applying for, and you're going to basically nuke that bridge with the new company from high orbit, right? They're not going to think really highly of you. They're going to think that you wasted their time. And that can kind of give you a negative outlook because, again, people talk, right? The other thing that's interesting about this, too, is if you take that counter offer and you know the underlying conditions aren't going to change, you have to start looking all over again. So you lose momentum. So that puts you in a big position of weakness, right? Especially if that new company and you're in a limited employment area was really your best bet to go to. It would be the natural logical progression for your job would be to go to this other company. So you don't want to burn your bridges with a new company, and you definitely don't want to lose momentum in your career by taking the counteroffer. Now, the other reasons to go on this one is once you've gotten your counteroffer, that's probably about as far as you're going to go with the company. Right? They're not going to do much with you on this one. There's no additional career progression with that company because you've already left once in their minds. So your loyalty to the current employer is always going to be in doubt. Again, there's that you tried to leave before theory of thinking, you're maybe not as loyal, maybe not as good. So you're probably going to have some really curtailed long-term goals, right? That counter offer is really a short-term expediency for the company and not a long-term solution to solving the problems why you left. Again, this is one of the reasons too why you just don't do the exit interview, right? You don't want to really overplay your hand and you don't want to underplay it. You just want to hold those cards in check, right? So if they offered, then you were probably underappreciated or invisible, and that's not going to change with the counter offer. They just realize that they need you for some reason, right? There's no guarantee that the job offer or the counter offer will lead to any greater job satisfaction or job security. If anything, in terms of job security, it makes it a little bit more tenuous, right? The employer knows by the stats you're going to leave anyways within the year. 90% of them do. So it says a lot about your worth. If the counter offer especially is a big bump in pay, you might not get a raise, even if you stayed there for a super long time. So you get a 30% bump in pay by that counter offer, they're going to not give you a raise until that catches up. And if you don't normally get raises, you may never get another raise again at that company. And then the other thing too is because you already abandoned the company once you threatened to leave, your loyalty is in question. So you'll be one of the first people to go if there's a mass layoff. Interestingly enough, it's a risk decision. Right now, there are very real reasons to stay and take the counteroffer. Right? There's a lot of pros to this. You already got some friends there. You know how the system works. You know where all the forms are. You know where the break room is. You already know the company culture. You know everything that you need to know about the company for right now. But again, there are some really reasons that you just want to just not take the counteroffer and you just want to go. The foremost for me, at least, is the underlying reason why you're leaving. It's not going to change. They're not going to suddenly fire your bad boss because you decided to up and go. So if you're fleeing a bad boss, you may have to continue to work for that bad boss. And does a bump in pay really make working for that boss any more attractive than it is today? Right? Do you really think that money is going to do this? Now, if the answer to that is yes, then by all means, take it if they give you one. But what this is interesting is that in the human resources management, a guy named Tony Lee in 2021 basically summarized Arlene Hirsch, career counselor. Basically, it said, if you send a signal you're unhappy, your boss is going to personalize that desire to leave. They're not going to spend any time on you. Right? You've already said you're going to go. They're not going to spend any time on you. They're not going to spend any career progression or anything else. The other thing that's interesting too is your motives will be suspect. And I kind of find that one interesting too. Well, they already tried to leave once. Why do they want this skill? Well, we'll just cut back on their training because we're not going to get our money's worth out of that employee, right? Because they're always going to wonder if your resume is still out there. And for most of us, we have a currently running always 24/7 resume just to kind of keep a pace of what's going on in the industry, especially in technology. You are always having your resume on the street. You rarely ever stay in one spot. So companies know this. Now, some companies by policy are not going to give you a counter offer, especially if the only thing they have to put on the table is a pay hike. And that I actually really appreciate that. Thank you for having a policy that says no counter offers, because I don't need the extra stress with that, right? Now, what makes this more interesting, though, is if it's a stall tactic, because you may be in a critical role, you just don't know it. And the company really needs to find time to find a replacement for you. And that counter offer buys the company time. They know the clock is ticking. You're going to be gone within 6 months to a year. And now, are you watching the company job listings? Because that will tell you if they're trying to replace you right away. If you turn in your resignation and all of a sudden there's a job rec for your position and there wasn't one before you said, I don't need to work here anymore, then that means that they just needed to buy time to replace you. And that's a really interesting kind of thing. It's how the company will tip their hand, is if before you put in your leaving the company letter and there's no job opening for your role, and then soon after you put in your leaving the company, even if they offer a counter offer, if all of a sudden your position opens up, then that counter offer is nothing more than a stall tactic. You're going to be gone anyways. So personally, for me, I have literally never accepted a counteroffer, and I've had 3 of them. And I'm really happy that I didn't accept those, right? I've never gone back to a company I've worked for, even when they reached out to see if I would be interested. And I've had 2 companies do that, which is really interesting, right? Because there are reasons why I left. And the reasons why I'm doing what I'm doing now, and the counteroffer for me just really muddies the water. It raises a bunch of complex issues in my head. And I know that even if I go back to that company, the core reason for me leaving isn't really going to change. It can't change, because usually why I'm leaving is because of company culture rather than just one thing. It's usually a bunch of things that have added up, and a lot of that ties back to company culture. Now, the bad part about this too is that because it won't change, it makes you more visible. If you take the counter offer, all of a sudden you have a lot more visibility with people that you may not even have met before in the past, but all of a sudden there's a lot of people really interested in your career that didn't know about you before, and that can be kind of weird, especially if they know that you've got a 6-month to 1-year window on this one. That unnatural interest in your career is going to show up in a job rec really, really quick, and can lead to written documentation of performance improvement plan, and then being let go either in a mass firing or being laid off or being fired. It's really interesting. Counter offers, great. I'm flattered. No, because again, for me, the underlying reason why I left isn't going to change. And if I'm unhappy now, a small bump in pay or a small bump in leadership or a small bump in whatever isn't going to really change anything in the longer run.